Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today is...
I am James, also known as Aramithius, for
and,
now.
Yeah, we were hoping for Felix later in the afternoon, but he might be
We'll
late.
see.
And today we are discussing Sermon 23. Yes. Sermon 23. The title of this channel is incorrect. Hold on.
Yes.
Title... Sermon 23. There we go.
We're prepared, folks.
False. Well, Sermon 23 is the scripture of the sword, and it's actually, it might not be that long an episode today because this one's fairly straightforward.
As far as it goes.
And yeah, as far as sermons go.
Yeah.
And there's just, I mean, the trick with Sermon 23 is it's sort of like, for me, it was sort of like a midterm exam where your teacher is trying to make sure that you understand all the terminology and the symbols. Because from here, things start to really kind of get worse.
Yep.
Oh, Vigilant. Yes, I'm sorry. They're discussing Skyrim mods in chat right now, and Vigilant just came up. I just watched somebody complete that, and yeah, that's a very long, very complex quest, and it. James, have you seen? Or do you know anything about Vigilant?
Nope. Nothing at all.
It's sort of like somebody wanted to do like Dark Souls and Skyrim.
Oh wow!
And so they created an entirely new world space that is supposed to be Molag Bal's heretical version of the Imperial City. After or before it's been devastated by the Alessian Order? Right. But it's hard to say because it's all like post-apocalyptic looking and so on. And so the lore for it is very grim and violent and deviates significantly from Elder Scrolls in some places. But it is fun to play for deep lore nerds because that guy brings out some names from characters that are mentioned once in passing in a tiny sentence somewhere. And
nice.
Yeah. Yeah, the fourth Vigilant chapter takes place in Cold Harbor, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's someone doing Enderall, but for an Elder Scrolls setting, basically.
Kind of. Enderall was more complex than Vigilant was. Vigilant was mostly about the combat. Yeah.
Fair enough.
There was a lot of storyline, and it was very... Yeah, it is hard to say. Yeah, Daedra don't perceive time like we do. That is accurate. So it's possible that this could be Molag Bal's opinion of what's actually happening currently in the Fourth Era, in which case he's way off base. But
or it's actually a crossover with the Siege of the Imperial City in ESO.
Yeah, could be.
That would be my other thought.
You do get to fight Pelennor, yeah. It's kind of all over the place. It's very hard to... The game the Vigilant basically outright states that you're a Shezarene, that the Dragonborn is a Shezarene, which is...
Well, you can make the argument.
Yeah, I made the argument constantly while I was playing it. But yeah, so yeah, good mod, really good mod, but tough.
Yeah.
And so Sermon 23 is it's noteworthy that it takes place after Sermon 22, where Vivec obtains the Treasurewood sword, and we talked about this in the previous episode, where the nature of the Treasurewood sword as a lessening song is yeah, Hendris, I agree. But the sword the Treasurewood sword as a lessening song, we talked about what it might be teaching people in House Mora, I think is where it was being used.
Yes.
And the answer, if Sermon 23 is the answer to that, the answer is apparently one of those 6 walking ways. Specifically the second one, I think. And yes, the second walking way. And it is a we'll cover it as we get to it, but let's just start with the thing. The sword, treated as a delicate meal, is the symbolic collage. Okay. So, immediately the delicate. So when this actually comes into, this is a metaphor that gets used a few times in the 36 lessons. The idea of eating something carefully.
Yes.
And that I'm pretty sure is what the first time I read the words delicate meal, what I thought was a very carefully prepared, elaborate, meal that you must eat delicately, because it's so, rich and structurally unstable. I guess it's like going to one of those gastronomy restaurants where they give you like a little piece of meat and then suspend a cloud of bubbles over it, and as the bubbles burst, it's actually the sauce that then drips onto the the meat or something, and you're supposed to eat it very carefully and then like wave the meat through the bubbles to get the sauce or something. And it's like and you're just sitting here thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, why did I pay $90 for this piece of meat? You've seen the menu. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or my immediate thought was someone's trying to serve up blowfish. It's the kind of thing you have to eat carefully or it will kill you.
And that is actually where I think we're coming from here.
Yeah.
I think the idea there's a phrase in a previous lesson, I think, about words being so sharp that they must be eaten carefully. Sharp like razored, like razors. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit difficult to say exactly what that's supposed to translate to, but I think in this particular usage, delicate meal is supposed to. We're back to the idea of eating in the 36 lessons and biting and eating. The idea of the consumption of a concept. And so if what Vivec is saying here is that the sermon of the sword, or the sword as a symbol, must be consumed or absorbed very carefully, and because it's dangerous. And the symbolic collage, which is what Vivec calls it, is a collection of symbols arranged so that they can become art. An artist often utilizes a collage to unite a sometimes unrelated collection of objects into a central theme. Using this technique, meaning can be suggested when the viewer thinks about the relationships between the objects in the collage.
Oh, that's interesting, because just building off that, it's a kind of almost a commentary on the reasons for war, is how I'm sort of spinning it, because you would have to sort of, in order to go to war, you have to persuade various different people to go along with the idea, for which you have different reasons. It could be something like, oh, this will get us wealth. This will allow us to pay back a grievance that happened 150 years ago or whatever. And or it's a case of, we must do this for a just world to prevail. Whatever sort of justifications you can kind of pull together. But all of those are symbols in and of themselves, kind of justice, the idea of the
truth
nation,
and
glory,
revenge, and
all of
glory,
this.
right?
Yeah. So and the sword can represent all of those things to different people depending on the context in which you use it. So
and it can take those things and unite them together in order to create this, and that leads us into. That's great, because that's going to segue into the later content here.
Yeah,
but
it also kind of I've just been watching The Boys, so Nazis are on the mind.
Sure.
The idea of kind of more idealistically wrapped war around kind of who we are and who they are and all that sort of thing is much more symbolically rich than other types of war generally. Because it kind of plays into constructed identities and so on, and that kind of melange of symbols. I don't know whether there's any mileage around thinking about the delicate meal of kind of we ate it to become it, being something in there.
Because I think that I don't know necessarily if Kirkbride et al. Are necessarily referencing the same thing when they use those phrases, but I think they are by accident. And they might be doing it on purpose. It would not surprise me, honestly, if they were. But I do think that the idea of we ate it to become it is very much like, I think it speaks to, in terms of things like the absorption of culture. I should mention my opinion of that we ate it to become it happens to be dramatically twisted by like way back many years ago in the Memospore IRC. We were planning on doing a LARP with Kirkbride to rewrite the creation of Tiber Septim.
Oh wow.
And I had been elected to play Zurin Arctus, the battle mage, and myself and a couple of other people in the IRC channel were kind of spitballing how we were going to change the character up. And one thing we came up with was like this idea that Zurin Arctus was actually a Seisi sorcerer, vampire, a vampire serpent. And so the idea was that we ate it to become it was a vampire idea of eating your victim and then turning into them.
Yeah.
But what it was an absorption of that person's essence, but also their memory and their culture and everything, so that you become this being. And what we were going to try to do, what I was going to try to do, was try to have Zurin Arctus kill Hilti Earlybeard and then eat him to become him. And yeah, that was going to be how I tried to rewrite the thing.
Yeah,
Zurin Arctus is actually a goblin.
Yeah.
So I would also like to point out that if the symbolic collage is used to teach people, it is also technically a symbolic college.
Yes.
And that's a free dad joke for today. So,
yeah,
it serves you well in the first half of life. All right. Now, this is a giant comment in the New Whirling School. It's big as shit. Because, okay, everybody get ready to mark it off.
Okay.
So, in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche by Carl Jung. Welcome to the Selectives Lorecast.
Yeah.
Carl Jung suggests that a person's life is divided into two halves. I've talked about this before on this cast. The first half is spent building your sense of personal identity, importance, and safety. It requires a break from support systems to build a sense of independence, the completion of trials or the passing of tests in order to build a sense of accomplishment, and the defeats of threats to build a sense of self-reliance and security. In the framework of the hero's journey, which Jung always fucking fell back on, it's what's called the adventuring phase, which is where the hero leaves home and tests his ability against the dangers of the world. This is if you're into the hero, into the Fool's Journey in the tarot, this is a sort of like a combination of the Strength card and the Chariot and a couple other, like I think one other thing. This is the development and enablement of the ego. So this is literally as you begin to create a personal identity, which separates you from everyone else.
And what does the sword do?
Well, hold on.
The sword cuts things.
The sword, yes, exactly. Okay, so the second half begins when a person realizes that their heroic and powerful ego that they display to the world is only the exterior or container of their self, which is much deeper, flawed, and still vulnerable. This person realizes that money, accomplishments, and health are not nearly as important as the satisfaction of the soul. To this end, the ego changes roles and works in service to the true self, to the soul, and brings about a sense of inner peace. So we often see this transition in myths and tales of proud warriors who one day break their swords and retire from the world of adventure, retreating to the mountains or the woods to meditate or work in service to a higher power. Anybody who watched the unfortunate resolution of Luke Skywalker's character will know where I'm coming from. These characters are often perceived as being grounded and humble, even if they still retain a great ability of whatever they had. The power of mythology tells us subliminally that these people are more than just capable fighters. These characters are in some way enlightened.
Yes, and it's why you always get things like the story of George Washington, who wanted to just who wanted to just retire and grow cabbages or whatever it was.
Yeah,
and there's another one. There's another Roman that did the same thing. I want to say, was it not Cincinnatus? I'm doing a complete brain fail. But there was one of the consuls that just retired to become a farmer, and he just constantly got dragged back into being involved with Roman politics, despite the fact that he ostensibly didn't want to. Yeah, and there's that sort of repeating motif for any sort of cultural hero who does really well and then puts things down. Yeah, it's the kind of, they know when to quit. sort of thing.
Yeah, and or they've decided that they've discovered some secret of warfare that makes it ugly or hideous, which makes them smarter than other younger warriors, or they've discovered a secret of life that makes all warfare irrelevant and pointless, and so they've, but again, that the idea is that they've retired from, they've to use a wuxia phrase, they've retired from the Zhanghu because they no longer because they've discovered something about themselves or about the world around them that makes them wise and smarter,
Yeah. Just to clarify, there's some bits going on in the chat about when the hero's journey happened versus Jung. But Jung was, as far as I remember, Campbell was about the 1920s or so, if I remember right, from when Heroes of a Thousand Faces was published, 20s or 30s. And it was kind of pulling from an awful lot of Freud's bits and pieces. Jung was a little bit prior to that by a decade or two, if I remember from when his work started to come out. He was sort of just after the turn of the century.
Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949.
Oh, 1949. Okay, my apologies.
I was about to say, Campbell's way older than Jung. And by a good 20-something years. And Campbell outright states that Jung was a major inspiration for a lot of the stuff, and also they tended to read a lot of the same shit. So.
Yeah. That's fair enough. And it will serve you well in the first half of life. I also took to mean of the idea of war is a young man's game, sort of thing. Just the case of if you're going to use the sword, then it serves you better when you are young. Yeah. Just simply on something fairly simple.
Well. The heroes' quests have not ended when they put down their swords. The transition to the second phase is marked by a sudden tension, a stressful urge to find satisfaction in a way they've never understood. Men and women in the real world often experience a sensation called a midlife crisis, and this is exactly what Jung was explaining. It's an existential crisis, a crisis of existence. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What is life for? Why did I accomplish all these things? Why? What was it for? It's the is it Talking Heads? You may find yourself with a beautiful house and a beautiful wife, and you may say to yourself, "My God, how did I get here?" And some Elder Scrolls cultures, such as the Orsimer, seem to interpret this transition in their lives as the nearness of death. The orc Umbra in Morrowind asks for an honorable death after he has grown tired of a life of adventure and victory. Clearly, the transition to the second half of life is not settling well with this character.
No, and there's the old orc in Skyrim who's exactly the same. It's kind of I'm in my prime, I must die.
Yeah, because it's only going to be downhill from here, and that's unacceptable.
Yes.
Aleister Crowley, there's another thing to check off. Sometimes compared a developed intellect to the use of the sword. Hey, there's Felix.
Hey.
Hello.
Does Felix have a local recording going?
No, sorry, I just got here because the power came on and I'm playing catch up.
Okay, well, you don't have too far to catch up. We're about 2 sentences in.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay,
which means that I've been talking for the last half an hour.
Hey, all right. What else is new about this stream?
Yeah.
Hey.
I was willing to. I was also kind of going to try and move it on to the name one dynasty that knows this not, just because that again that goes back to the idea of the sword being used to establish a new dynasty. Generally, that's what happens. It's very rare you will get a peaceful transition between dynasties anyway. But it's also going back to the whole idea of the sword being something that defines things, that cuts things out.
Which I was getting to.
All right, so that's also a good thing to start on, because the Divine Sword is now I've officially started the actual recording of like the local recording.
Oh, okay.
So that's where you can use that as like the Divine Sword, which Felix just thrust himself into the conversation. Huzzah. Yeah, and I'm really hoping that if anyone's playing bingo, they can absolutely get this as someone who's late showing up midstream.
Chat's already talking about it.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, chatters. So we see and salute you.
So this is
sorry.
I was going to say
want to actually talk about the Divine Sword for a hot second, though.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Just real quick. There are various examples in the real world of a divine sword or some kind of divine weapon, which usually serves as a very poor metaphor for godly power. That's really what it is. So, like I'm sure in the ancient caveman days they would have had yes, the holy stone of unending or something, like a magical stone that killed people. But you see this in a lot of we're kind of also talking about Joseph Campbell and the Hero with a Thousand Faces. Look at, for example, Rama being able to string up an impossible golden bow.
Yes.
See that also reflected in the story of Odysseus when he comes back and he knows that his wife is having to entertain all these awful suitors, and Odysseus is like, I'm going to be very extra and just show up and take back my kingdom and be a total drama queen because that's who I am. My name is Odysseus. And so he manages to actually string of this boat and performs all the magical challenges. Oh, look at that, right? So it's usually a metaphor for godly power, divine right to rule, all this kind of stuff. And then, as a completely unrelated tangent, the U.S. Air Force has an official sword. It's tacky as hell looking.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And there we go. That's my little mini rant.
Well, you saw the sword that the king held for the crowning ceremony,
the coronation,
like a couple weeks ago. I watched it because I was curious to see all the bling, and
stolen from half the world, baby.
Yep, and but the sword is handmade. Every coronation, it's a different sword. And it is absolutely the most useless and gaudy excuse for a sword that you've ever seen. There's no blade; it's all jewels, and it's just unbelievably tacky. And because it's a symbol, did the king make it? What do you think? Did the king make it?
You think that man with his sausage fingers could have made such a weapon? Like, no.
Terry Pratchett made the sword that he was knighted with.
Yes,
out of meteorite, cool. out of a meteorite.
Yes,
yes. Thank you, Yagni's right there with me. So anyway, so
and he made it out of meteoric iron as well, so that's even cooler.
So Crowley says that a developed intellect is similar to the use of a sword, specifically in terms of discernment. It's the ability to identify the separation of things. We were talking earlier about how the first half of your life is spent building up the structure of the ego and discerning yourself from other people. This, of course, serves everyone very early in life, since the ability to distinguish individual objects that are not oneself is a fundamental part of an infant's brain development. Thus, in early life, we must discover I am separate from other things, but later in life, as a requisite part of spiritual progression, we must discover that I am part of everything. We cannot do the latter without first doing the former, even if the former seems to inhibit the realization of the latter. But the true secret of the sword is this, that the cutting that allows us to separate ourselves early in life is the same cutting that allows us to strip away our sense of ego to reach a true sense of ourselves and our connections to everyone else. That's all from one sentence. Okay, so...
Okay, well... yeah.
So that's kind of what the sort of the... oh, hey, great. Yeah. That's kind of the psychoanalytical metaphor for the sword. And it's in Crowley's deck, I think the sword suit is a lot of similar kind of ideas. I want to see this. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Yeah, it's completely useless. There's no blade to speak of whatsoever. It's very light so that the king could hold it. Because
well, in fairness, is that not just the scabbard that's presented there, or is that the actual blade?
I was reading that was the actual sword.
Oh my word!
If you watch the marching ceremony up to it. They actually, the woman who's supposedly holding the sword to present to the king is not holding a sword at all. She's holding a completely different thing that's supposed to be like representative of the sword. And it's huge. And again, looks nothing like an actual sword. Yeah, I watched the ceremony as long as I could before I started to get really, really offended. Like it stopped being pageantry and it started turning into excess. and then I just started getting really angry, and I just turned it off.
Yeah. No, I looked for some photos, and I was basically saying, was there any photos of Prince Andrew actually smiling? Because he doesn't like to be in public since he's been accused of various forms of pedophilia.
Yeah. The Queen looked like she was it was really landing on her when they actually put the crown on her head. That woman nearly broke down. And I was like, good for her, man. Just keeping it afloat, at all is probably a Herculean feat. So I felt very sympathetic to her.
And she's been after that job for like decades.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
She's like, fucking finally.
Yeah.
I'm about to go all Lady Macbeth on this
geriatric,
bitch.
but I'm finally queen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, how many people get to see that? I'm finally queen. Yep.
Yeah, along with the headlines of, shortly following Elizabeth II dying, the headlines in Private Eye was 70-year-old man finally gets job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the like.
Yeah, that was good. But hey, right, are we supposed to be an Elder Scrolls?
Yes, we are supposed to be an Elder Scrolls. But yeah,
a casual Elder Scrolls podcast.
Yeah,
well, we're going to talk a lot more about swords in a minute because one of the other things that I wanted to mention is something that I've been looking into, which is it was an observation made by a YouTuber without any actual resolution, which was that in Japanese mythology and fiction in general, there are a lot of very famous swords that have names. And some of them are more famous than the warriors who wielded them.
Yep.
And in Chinese mythology and fiction, the opposite is true. There are very few named swords. Green Destiny, everybody knows from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yep.
Is one of the few exceptions. Generally speaking, in Chinese fiction, heroes do not use swords or weapons with names, and if they do, they've named them because it's their favorite weapon, of some kind. But the weapon itself carries very little, things. And and one of the things that I've been trying to do some research into and failing horribly is why this is. What is it about Japanese martial culture that emphasizes the weapon more than the one who wields it? Or am I going about this the wrong way? And that it's not emphasizing the weapon, it's de-emphasizing the warrior.
Yes. It's also possibly a commentary on quite how long the general quality of swords in Japan, because it's fairly common knowledge that the reason that they came up with the elaborate having to spend a year to make a sword and folding the metal however many hundreds of times was because the iron they were working with was absolutely terrible, and so it couldn't hold an edge, it couldn't do anything, and so you had to work it really hard, you had to be really elaborate in order to get a decent weapon out of it, and so my immediate thought is that if a weapon is good enough that it can be passed from warrior to warrior, it's really, really, really exceptional.
Yeah.
Whereas in China, they didn't have that problem.
Not so much.
And so having weapons that were passed on in some capacity or other was not an unusual thing.
And that's
so not worth noting.
That's something you're going to want to keep in mind when we're talking about the sword as a symbol in Elder Scrolls lore, is where is Elder Scrolls deriving their inspiration from? Is it from the Japanese empowered weapon or the Chinese empowered warrior?
It's kind of questionable, but as you sort of said that this is based a bit on Journey to the West, then
you would think Chinese.
Possibly used Chinese, yes. But if we're going with general geek culture of the time, Japanese was more well known.
Be weeb.
So it will be weeb culture that you go on rather than knowing Chinese literature.
And in that respect, what are we going to get in Elder Scrolls 6? And I can almost guarantee you it's going to be magical weapons and less skill. But I mean, because itemization and reward loops.
And NFTs.
Please don't remind me how much I'm going to be probably disappointed by that, especially since they haven't consulted me yet. Be like, hey, we understand you're a huge Elder Scrolls fan, especially about Redguard. So would you like to, add a little something? And I'd be like, sure, Todd Howard, anything for you, bestie. Like,
buddy,
come on.
The hundreds of millions of dollars that we're spending on this is mostly to make you happy. So,
if only.
So the unity of my approach is understood by the immobile warrior. Well, I originally was thinking this had something to do with like a meditative warrior. A warrior of accomplishment who lives the first half of his life may only be at a moment of rest and reflection away from the realization that will send him into the second half of his life. When a warrior stops all movement and considers his nature and his relationship to the world around him, it can sometimes result in that fateful moment of introspective awareness.
So I thought we were reading from the lesson for a second. I was like, wait a second, I don't remember that being in there.
That's making too much sense to be in the lessons.
It seems a little wordy. There is also the idea evoked
we have a bingo.
Hey, there's...
All right. Well done, Tor.
There's also the idea evoked by fortification.
Now that's my cue to leave.
which is to suggest, which I'd suggest should remind you of the image of an armored warrior. What is interesting to contemplate is the idea of Vivec actually wavering whilst donning her Cancerian armor in Sermon 19, where the provisional house is built, but this time with fear.
Or I would go along the lines of just the immobile warrior is a warrior who has stopped being a warrior, and it's a case of a warrior that is mobile. My mind immediately goes to statues, and so you start to think history, it's a foreshadowing of later, much later, my reign will be seen as an act of the highest love. It's history will vindicate me.
So true eyes are required. Rejoice as my own subjects and realms. I built for you a city of swords, by which I mean laws that cut people who live there into better shapes. And here we are at this thing again.
Yay!
The idea of Vivec City being a place where Vivec can culturally shape the Dunmer once again brings us back to this reinforcing idea of Vivec having a golden path, a plan for the Dunmer and moving into the future, a sort of Frank Herbert-esque idea of one dune away from... Oh, hey. Hi, Yagni.
Yes, Yagni, you just... The perfect timing.
Maybe open up the Twitch chat. That might be a good idea.
And so, yeah, the idea is that is that Vivec has a plan for the Dunmer to defend them against a great oncoming mysterious evil, and that Vivec City is there to cut them into better shapes, to make them better suited for this eventual catastrophe, which I would argue is Vivec.
Yes.
Because he just drops a whole fucking planet on, or asteroid on him. And,
yes, I think it's kind of notable here that it's talking about the city of swords, and it's the city that's cutting you into a better shape.
Right.
It's not just a Morrowind thing; it's a Vivec City thing specifically.
Specifically Vivec City, because again, as Vivec tells us in a previous or later sermon, Vivec is the city.
Yes.
25, I think it is. Which we'll get into. I'm not looking forward to that one. So, better shape. So, okay. So, Vivec intends to create a place where the people of Veloth can become better people. This is, Vivec describes herself later in other places as the killer of the weeds of Veloth. Oh, in Sermon 13. Okay. Yep. And this sort of also explains Vivec's idea of what love is, of trying to improve people out of a sense of love. Hangar asteroids over cities is not ocean compliant. No, it is not.
No.
Anyway, so girls burn their dresses on my arrival if I am armored. They crawl to me as bled pilgrims. I think we all know where this is coming from, right? This is just bled pilgrims would be virgins.
Yes.
Minor spirits die without trace. Follow me of all the Omsavi if you are to mark your days with killing. A Altadune, the third law of weaponry. All right, so A Altadune translates from Elnofex to roughly I am a useful weapon, but I do mean very roughly.
Yes. It doesn't even mean useful as such, but it just is weapon.
Yeah, it was a useful
thereabouts.
tool, I think was the way that it was explained to me, is I'm a useful, Altadoon is a useful tool. Yeah, Johnny, exactly. This is Vivec basically saying, I'm really cool.
And you're just going to have to take my word for it, bro.
Yeah. Well, I'm a god. I know. I know all kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
The third law of weaponry is possibly just one of many laws, but we don't have any other ones. There's no first or second law of weaponry that we've been given. It's very possible that they are Vivec-themed equivalent to Sathasil's law of gears, but I can't really put that together. I can't. I've tried.
We've not got the pieces.
Well, and also the gear, the winding of the gears is something that we're going to have to cover probably, and it's going to be a community effort because there haven't been any silver bullets of, hey, a lot of this is quotes from Aleister Crowley that got the ball rolling, So we might have to actually fucking bribe Tuttle. The immobile warrior is never fatigued. Of course not. He doesn't move.
No.
I mean, what you need a comment for that? Come on.
No.
He cuts. Okay, yeah.
And it's also pausing. So yes.
Yeah, true. He cuts sleep holes in the middle of a battle to regain his strength. Okay.
Yes.
I remember discourse about this back in the day.
Yeah. Metaphysics of Morrowind was the article that got me into Elder Scrolls lore. I cannot divorce my brain completely from it. I can't. So
that's fair.
The author's suggestion that this is a sort of the idea of saving your game in the middle of a fight.
Or like pausing it to open up the inventory to consume 50 cheese wheels.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or just potions, given that this is Elder Scrolls 3.
True. But this is
diamonds.
Or diamond, yeah. Or just crunch a bunch of fucking rocks.
My bitch is bad and bougie,
Yeah. Oh look, Dwemer metal, put it in my mouth.
Morrowind was such an objectively horrifying game.
Objectively horrifying. What the hell was the Nerevarines' teeth made of, for the love of shit?
It's mine now. I've licked it.
Yeah.
It was the teeth of the world that you see at the end of Ocean's Memory. Boom.
Or is it like that Dave Chappelle sketch where it's like, this is a bunch of diamond powder. I take bites of it every time I walk past. I know it's bad for you, but what can I say? It makes my doo-doo sparkle, baby.
Oh,
all right. So, a metaphor for saving your game during combat. The immobile warrior is the player who sits unmoving behind his controls while his avatar fights. This is a great interpretation, and it's so good that I honestly can't get it out of my head. But all right.
If that's the case, what does that mean for the unity of my approach is understood by the immobile warrior? Because the player generally doesn't understand the 36 lessons.
No, not at all. Well,
so how does that work?
I got into that. It's my suspicion that this is a reference to a Zen-like state of meditation during combat, a trance not unlike the one dervishes experience while conducting their whirling dance. Remember the whirling school?
Yeah. General flow state stuff.
So perhaps the lack of movement in the immobile warrior is actually just the perception of the practitioner. The warrior does not move. The whole world moves around him. Right?
Yep.
It's also possible that the immobile warrior could be creating tiny moments while fighting during which they can recover their strength, a feat made possible by moving so little that there appears to be no movement at all.
It's also the case that if it's the idea of the immobile warrior is if the world is moving around them, the immobile warrior is the most powerful warrior possible because the warrior is the one that's moving the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
exactly
it's
the whole world rolls around them. Yeah, and you can go into all kinds of the Japanese principles of swordsmanship, where the warrior is the enemy is irrelevant in some schools of swordsmanship of warrior philosophy in Japan. The enemy is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what weapon they're using. None of that shit matters. The only thing that matters is you and how you react to stimulus, basically.
Which actually brings us to the fifth really nicely.
The fifth?
The next one down.
Yeah, and we'll get to it.
I'm saying that would have been a great segue.
I'm not done chewing on this. Or am I actually? Also, yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, let's do the fifth. Instinct is not a reflex action, but many miracles held in reserve. So instinct is something that was once said to separate man from animal, in the respect that a man can fight his instincts while the animal cannot. If you haven't checked off Dune already, here's another one for you. The Gom Jabbar determines if the person who's being tested is a human or not.
Yes.
If you're an animal, you pull your hand out from the box because you cannot control your instincts. This is outdated thinking, since we now have scientific evidence that both assertions are untrue. But from a metaphysics standpoint, instinct can be considered to be the communication of the divine inner self to the conscious ego, transmitted via emotion and involuntary action. Any communication between the mortal and the divine can also be considered to be a miracle, so more so because acting with instinct is acting without thought or ego. There's also a note here that I didn't add in, that I probably should have, which is the idea of, there's an idea in Qigong and in Chinese martial arts of learning how to react with your body and not your brain. So that this is somewhat related to Zen states in Japanese sword fighting. And it was speculated at one point or another that what was happening was that that this is basically the sort of Chinese equivalent of really intense military training in the United States, where they're training soldiers to react to a situation in combat without thinking about it.
Yep.
So when somebody grabs a soldier, they do a thing and put them into a lock or pull a weapon or do whatever, and they don't think about doing it because it's been so heavily trained into them that it becomes what I think was at the time called a spinal reaction. The reflex happens in the spinal cord and never enters and doesn't actually enter the brain until after the action has been taken. So you realize your body has done a thing after you've done it or while you're doing it.
Which is really bad for PTSD.
Yeah, terrible for PTSD and an awful thing to do to people in general.
Yes.
But it is related to it. Well, but it's not necessarily that bad because it is related to the instinct to pull your hand out of a fire if you suddenly feel that your hand is hot. You know.
Well, I can also offer like an actual kind of example of this where sort of instincts take over. Is a then buddy of mine at the time was trying to joke with me, saying there's no way you could tell from like where someone's head is going to be if like I choke you out from behind, and I said, because I had like this little knife at the time, I said no, I would honestly just like probably just like stab wherever someone like if I had a knife on me, I would just try and stab them. And then at some point he'd like without warning just came up from behind me. It's like, where am I? And like I could immediately tell like, oh, I'm being choked, the person's right here. And it was like almost immediate of like knife comes out and like reaching towards that. And only then, after I had already like made contact with part of his face, did I realize, wait, hang on. I know that voice, but like, it was just so instinctual of like, someone's doing this, so I know to do this. It was like, oh, wait, shit, no. And he already had like a bit of a cut. Thankfully. Yeah, I know. Thankfully I didn't seriously hurt him, but he was very upset with me afterwards, and understandably. But at the same time, it's like,
well, but why the fuck are you grabbing people?
Like, and it was also like, dude, I told you that A, I would know how to like identify that and find that out, and B, like that I had a knife on me. It's not like you did this some other time when I didn't have a weapon on me. Like what? Like
you could have picked
this
a better
is as
spot.
much your fault as mine. Okay, like
and that's
so that's like it's an actual thing, people. This isn't super soldiers. Like it can be a thing.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd also say that it's also I don't know whether we're just kind of spiraling massively off a point, given this is talking about enlightenment and I'm about to go into evolution.
Yeah, why stop now? Yeah.
There's a metaphor in there somewhere.
Yeah. But instinct being mini miracles, I almost think of that as being something that is just happenstance, because you think about how evolution is supposed to work, that it selects for random instances where such a thing happens, as opposed to the thing that kills you quicker. So if you have enough people who have the instinct, who have the
mutation,
have the reaction to do thing A, which is punch whatever's trying to kill you in the face automatically, or to jump away from the thing, like that when those sorts of things do come through after however many millions of iterations, and so on, that your bundle of instincts is essentially based on the past happenstance, and we already established that coincidence does not exist in the land of the Velothi. So it's the happenstances which allowed your ancestors to survive and allowed them to develop certain tendencies and skill sets, which then become part of you and part of the fabric of you. And so if we're going to link that to if we're going to link that whole idea to coincidence not being a thing, then it can be nothing but miracles if God is training you to be in such a way, because they've cut away your ancestors that don't do something like that.
Exactly.
And then you become bred for that in a very real sense.
God. It's a it's an insidious idea, but there it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, what is not Elder Scrolls lore, but the deep evaluation of numerous insidious ideas. I mean, really.
It's called the arena.
With that, with it's all bloodshed, baby. It's all violence. Reach heaven through violence. With that being said, though, about many miracles held in reserve, like as a point, is I do actually really like that idea of, instinct as a kind of mini miraculous moment. It's not necessarily luck. Luck is different from a miracle. And I think that's actually part later on in the 5th line. I am the welfare that decides which warrior will emerge. Beg not for luck. Serve me to win. And that kind of gives off a bit of like Yoda and the Force vibes of do or do not. There is no try. Reach out with your feelings. Like trust the Force. Trust your instincts. It's not about rationality, and it's just like, it's pure fucking vibes, man, is really what it's saying. But when you actually do a lot of martial arts training and stuff, that's part of why they do the training like 1,000 times, and there's that maxim of don't fear the master who's practiced 1,000 moves one time, fear the guy who's practiced one move 1,000 times, because he's not going to get it wrong. So that idea of, you just like constant training, you the forms, and then when you're like sparring with someone, you may start off really slow, and then look, a year later you're all practically moving at the speed of light, and you're matching each other perfectly, and not like managing to land hits because you've been practicing so much, and that's kind of like all that training paying off. So it's just a neat, fun concept to think about that has some real world applications.
Chim should be as effortless as scratching your head. That's actually, there's a Buddhist story about exactly that. Yeah. About enlightenment is like the act of a child scratching their foot. And, So I am the welfare that decides which warrior will emerge. Beg not for luck, serve me to win. This is, again, coincidence doesn't exist. So so Vivec's basically saying, pray to me if you want to win, because that's literally the only way to do it.
Hashtag winners only.
Which is also which is also something that's interesting, because they're talking about a warrior culture as opposed to soldier culture,
right?
Because warriors, they do have the skill to determine it in most cultures where warriors are a thing. This is just thinking about Morrowind as kind of a pre-gun culture, so to speak, because you can. I can see Felix frowning. Just bear with me.
No, that was a tech thing that was happening. Don't worry about it.
Cool. That basically, because firearms makes death so random, it's all about kind of self-preservation and first and foremost, rather than necessarily skill at arms being the primary skill. But warriors, they need to master their own weapon in order to win, because that's the way you survive. It's a very, very different kind of mode of thinking. And it's also, again, the assignation of everything to Vivec. It's not the case that the warrior can survive on their own merits. It's the case that the warrior needs to rely on Vivec to win. And I personally think that because of that sort of logic, the luck line is a little bit out of place. Because you can think about sort of chances where your opponent slips on mud or something on the ground, or blood or whatever, in a pre-gun society and they make a mistake. But if you have two warriors on relatively equal footing, it's the skill that decides it, not luck. So I'm thinking that Vivec is, again, puffing themselves up a little bit too much.
Sure.
But that's absolutely part
it's
of the
the
course
Lord of
at
the
this
Middle
point.
Air, so yeah.
He's full of it. Yeah. So the span of the apparently inactivated is your love for the absolute. This is a wordy sort of way of saying this is the lifetime of something that was never started in the first place. A love of the absolute is pointless, insignificant, and self-defeating. Vivek's always argued this, and it's all over the 36 lessons. Yeah. The birth of God from the Netchman's wife is the abortion of kindness from love. This is I believe, a very something very close to Aleister Crowley, or a quote from him. This is the idea when Aleister Crowley likes to define what love is in his culty terminology. Love is very much sort of a tough but fair, I think, is the is kind of the rule. People in the OTO have leveraged this philosophy on occasion as an excuse to be indifferent to the suffering of other human beings. That's been my experience reading a number of articles written by practicing members. I don't think they speak for the majority, but it is concerning nonetheless that that people would sort of lose perspective about this. But I mean, these sort of fringe philosophies tend to be embraced by people who are trying to find a reason to be sociopaths. So.
I don't disagree. But if I could offer a more Canadian perspective on this, about the difference about kindness from love, is there's a maxim, at least to a certain extent up here, about the difference between being kind and being nice. So people can be nice to you, but not actually very helpful.
Sure.
You know, someone could be like, "Oh no, sorry, I can't. I don't know. Sorry, best of luck." And that could very much be a lie, and they're just not even willing or able to help you because they're too busy. Whereas like the Maritimer mother from New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, who's like, "Jesus, you know, you're gone for 2 hours. We were worried sick. Oh, geez, you're soaking wet because I told you to take your towel. Quick, come here by the fire. Get you dried up. God,
don't have 2 cents in your head to rub together.
Have some soup." And it's like, you're getting chastised, but it's also lots of actual kindness being shown your way, as opposed to niceness.
Or is it?
So there's that distinction there.
Yeah.
And so the idea of the birth of God from the Netchman's wife is the abortion of kindness from love. Is you know what? Guess what? We're all Keimer, Dunmer, we understand hardship. It's kind of why we undertook this, undertook Velos' journey and endeavor in the first goddamn place. So no, love is not going to be kind. Love is not kindness or niceness. Love is love. And the sooner you understand that in all aspects of that, the sooner you can get to my quote unquote level.
Why is the word abortion used here? Because if I'm just thinking of the way that Felix is talking about it is kind of the separation from, where divorce would be a more appropriate word.
Right. But abortion being the idea that it was a part of love, and then kindness was removed forcibly from it. It's Crowley. It's a phrase that Crowley used because Crowley likes to use words that piss people off.
The original edgelord.
Yeah. Well, he was very frustrated as a young man. So the true sword is able to cut the chains of generations, which is to say the creation myths of your enemies. I kind of drew a parallel here between this and the and Mehrunes Razor in Oblivion, and the way Mankar Camoran rewrote his Nimic. At its base, the intellectual sword is built from its foundations as a child learning within its family, within its village, within its city-state, within its country, within its continent, within its planet, all throughout time. These are the heaviest and earliest changes to hereditary identity that must be overcome to become without identity, or rather to be identified as all.
Yes, and you can also just essentially use the sword to wipe out another culture and thereby destroy their myths and their identity. It's also a suggestion of the sword as instrument of genocide. In some way, shape, or form.
Oh, Yagdi just pointed something out about the abortion of kindness from love that it didn't occur to me, and I apologize for, because now that he points it out, it's fucking obvious. The birth of God from the Netchman's wife is the abortion of kindness from love. So the idea that so we're contrasting the birth of God, in other words, Vivec, or possibly Om-Sibi, is the abortion of kindness from love. So as Vivec was birthed from the Netchman's wife, the reverse was done to kindness. Was done to love. See, that's why the phrase abortion comes in. That's why the word abortion is being used, because it's being connected to the birth of Vivec.
It also suggests it wasn't live in the first instance in its own right.
Yeah, it's art. Look on me as the exiled garden, all else is uncut weed. Okay, so
smoke them if you got them.
Jung is in the Red Book explains the experience of rejection. The torture by society of a rejected soul feels like expulsion to the desert. This is the desert being a symbol that Jung used a lot. The metaphor is used to explain the importance of feeling accepted by the people around you. As Jung says, no culture of the mind is enough to make a garden out of your soul. Though Vivec is exiled to the desert, Z does not feel the scorn of others. Therefore, Z forms a bountiful garden in the midst of exile, strange flowering fruit in this desert of scorn, a lotus flower blooming among filth. And perhaps Vivec is also testifying to her dreadful past of crime and chaos. I've experienced the worst of society, but now I lead it.
Okay.
So, 8th, I give you an ancient road tempered by the second walking way. So yeah, I mean, this, like, of all the examples of the 6 walking ways and the 36 lessons, this is kind of one of the more obvious ones. It seems to read about, becoming a god or reaching heaven by destroying the weeds from your garden, or removing all the practicing Vivec's idea of love, living in Vivec City and evolving and becoming meaner and sleeker and stronger and etc. I asked Kirkbride about this on IRC once directly. I was like, just describe the second walking way, and he said it's defeating any enemy that sits in front of you. And what he was doing, I think, was we'll actually get into that a little bit later in the next 2 sentences, but what I think he was doing is he was kind of giving me a piece of information that this sermon doesn't really hand out to you, which is the idea of defeating yourself. There's the idea of, like, the progression of the sword in Chinese swordsmanship, which is that the first level, see if I get this right, is that a swordsman feels no separation between his body and his sword, so they become one, sort of.
It's an extension of yourself.
Yeah. The second level is that the sword becomes irrelevant and can be cast aside, and the swordsman can make a sword out of anything, like a blade of grass. The third is that the sword becomes one with the swordsman, so that they no longer need to use anything to be a sword, that the swordsman becomes the sword themselves. And the fourth stage, the last stage, is the idea of the swordsman removing himself from everything. The removal of the swordsman. So you've removed the sword in various stages, and then you remove the swordsman. And this can be that this, I'm sorry, the fourth step is supposed to be that the swordsman puts down the sword, stops fighting, stops practicing violence, and instead teaches. Which is fine. But I think what was happening here is that we were talking about the idea of something in psychoanalysis about defeating yourself and becoming gaining victory over your own darkness, you've done enough shadow work so that you are no longer self-defeating. The things that hold you back from greatness have been eliminated.
That said, I'm moderately skeptical. If Kirkbride's explanation was being able to defeat anything that's in front of you, are you ever in front of yourself?
That's the idea.
Beyond
is that
puns with mirrors.
Right. But that's the idea, is that eventually, once you've defeated all the enemies that life has put in front of you, the only enemy left to defeat is yourself.
Yeah.
And that once that has been done, you have removed all the obstacles in front of you, including the obstacles you put there. And then at that point, you have reached heaven or become divine or something. So your hands must be huge to wield any sword the size of an ancient rope.
Before we get any further, we have a question from Yagni that, does the
Gardener of Man.
Yes.
Does this connect in any way to Hermaeus Mora's position as the Gardener of Man? This is Hermaeus Mora, his name translates to the Gardener of Mankind.
Does it?
Think.
Mora is wood.
Is the Man of the Woods. That's what it was.
Yeah, Man of Woods.
But Hermaeus Mora is called the Gardener of Man, and I have to tell you, I do agree that just the phrase alone, Gardener of Man, seems to sound like somebody who is trying to improve mankind. That historically has not been the case with Hermaeus Mora.
No.
So I don't know how appropriate that would be for Hermaeus Mora. A different Daedric prince maybe, but not, I don't know, not Hermaeus Mora. I don't think that title fits Hermaeus Mora very effectively, unless the gardener is a son of a bitch. In which,
Well, I see it more in the sense of being a gardener of men, of tending to things so that you can then harvest them for your own pleasure and delight.
Yes.
Or perhaps in the respect that a gardener catalogs and maintains plants.
That too.
Hermaeus Mora could be gardening, knowledge and culture of man, possible. Occasionally grab somebody once. Sure, yeah, that works, Draylen, yeah. So your hands must be huge to wield any sword the size of an ancient road, yet he who is of the right stature may irritate the sun only with a stick. Symbolism, the size of one's hands frequently denotes like the amount of power that they have, or you're reading yaoi porn. Felix got that joke.
Demonetized.
And
I was just holding out for a Trump joke, but
okay, they're huge, perfectly huge.
Huge hands.
Look at my hands, they're huge.
They're huge, people. They're perfectly big. Along intellectual avenues, huge hands might be a strong intellect, schooled and developed among many, or strongly in a single discipline. There's some fairly weak points that I bring up here, blah, 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 blah. If you remember Sermon 11, you'll recall that Vivec takes a somewhat dim view of physical strength in the grand metaphysical scheme of things. The second walking way is a legitimate path to divinity, but this path means little in the presence of God. Your hands might be huge, but you must cut them both off before facing him. He who is of the right stature may irritate the sun only with a stick. This is sort of like the idea of being such a massive force that in order to poke at the sun, you just need a little stick because you're already all the way up there.
So I see multiple ways of interpreting this. There's your way, which is like that's usually the first one I go to, but I also get shades of Tall Papa, who grew so big he could place the stars in the sky. He knocked the hunger out of Sep's mouth with a big stick.
Yep.
It's references to the towers and to Magnus. It's like there's so much in one fucking sentence here. And that's part of what I love and hate about Elder Scrolls lore. But yeah, I do tend to like all of those interpretations relatively equally, because I like the idea that, and I mean, you could also apply the real world quote that Teddy Roosevelt said of speak softly and carry a big stick. So like there's lots of ways you can interpret this, but I do like the idea of all of them having a part to play in what it means to be of right stature.
Sure.
Like to be like not in the physical sense of like, oh yes, shoulders back, head up, carry yourself with your head held high, like that adds to part of the metaphor of it, but it's like that's kind of a more literal thing as opposed to the stature of someone in the eyes of the public being a hero, a god. Like it's there's so many ways of interpreting this one fucking line. I hate it.
Yeah. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. I think that was rule 1, wasn't it?
Maybe.
You gotta
fucking
balance
knows?
books on top of your head. That's
I can't actually remember where that sits in Jordan Peterson's book, but it is in there. Yeah.
Put your shoulders back, head held high, so everyone may see you cry.
Yeah.
Don't look at the mess in your room. Head held high.
So
yeah,
that's like, I mean, that's basically like the walking ways aren't really supposed to be like a instruction manual on how to become unstoppable.
No.
But so each one is sort of intentionally vague in that respect. But a few of them, like I think the 6th, are relatively cut and dry. Figure out a way to combine souls.
Yes.
And you're golden. And but this is one of the ones that's a little more abstract, and yet of all the walking ways, this one is the most approachable by regular people. Because at the end of the day, this is just about being a badass, about being as good at being you as you can possibly get. And that's kind of like, this is sort of like the everyman's version of the walking ways. This is
although it's not quite that in relation to what's going on here, because the second walking way is the thing that tempers the ancient road. So it's not the ancient road in itself. It's not the sword of the ancient road.
It's how you walk the ancient road.
It's
That's
how
the
you
way
make
I
the
interpret
ancient
it.
road. Yeah,
that's how I interpret it too.
Yeah. But yeah, it's how you make the ancient road better, and how you improve upon it. Vivec has already slaughtered a bunch of people so that here people can walk the road, and in whatever way they see they need to, and may guide them into wielding the road properly, which is one heck of an image. I mean, I kind of just have an image of just kind of someone just having a huge red slab of tarmac with white stripe down the middle, but if it's the road that is the thing that's being wielded, that's, I don't know whether we can link that to the path of the Dharma as such, but I don't know. I may be approaching it from entirely the wrong way, which is likely given that this isn't really going anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know. I've gotten some seemingly conflicting information about this, and so like a lot of this part of this project was me trying to make it all fit.
Okay.
And I'm not entirely certain that it's very possible that the reason why it seemed conflicting was because it was coming from different authors who weren't talking to each other.
Yeah, that'll be with that.
So that's basically Sermon 23. Not that much.
Yay!
Yeah, not a huge amount to it. Sermon 24 is it's Horde Mountain.
Yep.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. It's Dick Hat. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one. All right, so we'll do 24 in 2 weeks. Yeah, this works out fine because I have guests next weekend, so that's terrific.
Ooh, fun.
So June 3rd, hopefully everybody can expect to see us then. Congratulations to everybody who got bingo, and you win nothing, but feel good about it, I guess, if you can.
Yes.
Find a way. And
a walking way. Wink, wink.
Hey. Whoa. And thanks to everybody who subbed and etc. And that's a box. Okay. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.